With us rapidly closing in on the second iteration of the Pokemon Legends series games, with ZA releasing later this year, I decided to go back and play the game that kicked the series off, Legends Arceus. Partly just to get myself back into the Legends style gameplay, but also to answer the question, does Legends Arceus still hold up 3 years later? Honestly, I was scared to replay this game. Not scared like, I can't sleep tonight because I'm afraid the Alpha Snorlax is gonna come out of my closet and eat my toes. But scared as in, I wasn't sure if it was going to be as good as I remembered. Because in truth, this game actually feels remarkably similar to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee in a way. I know that might sound ludicrous, but hear me out. Both are very experimental standalone titles that primarily focus on being a Pokédex collectathon more than anything else with very stripped down battle mechanics. And for the record, I have attempted to replay Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu only once. And I think I made it all the way to the 3rd gym before I just said, okay, I'm about to head out, this thing ain't doing it for me. The force catching aspect of the game just completely ruined the experience for me. And I was afraid that Legends Arceus, being a similar type of game, would completely lose all of its replayability. But I'm happy to report that was not the case at all. While I did notice considerably more flaws in the gameplay loop this time around, the game was still almost as enjoyable as it was on a first playthrough. And I think the fundamental difference is just that this game makes the act of catching Pokemon incredibly streamlined and fun. In Let's Go, it was just, okay, I need to move my Joy-Con at the right time that the ring shrinks to hit an excellent throw, and I've already been doing this for countless years in Pokemon Go, except not with crappy motion controls. And despite the fact that trainer battles are so incredibly devalued in Let's Go, the game still keeps hundreds of them. There is hardly a reduction in trainers compared to Fire Red or the original Gen 1 games. In Legends Arceus, this game knows that the catching mechanics are its bread and butter. And instead of trying to awkwardly balance that with many trainer battles, it leans completely into the Safari Zone-like experience, giving you dozens of ways to interact with wild Pokemon, either by throwing mud balls, smoke bombs, sticky globs, and of course, Pokeballs that have an incredibly satisfying concussion-inducing sound effect. Certain Pokemon react to thrown items differently, some have better hearing or eyesight than others, some are timid, some are aggressive. They all have different foods that they like. There's enough different factors to keep this relatively simple gameplay loop compelling for a long period of time in my opinion. And with all of these Pokemon having different Pokédex research tasks assigned to them, it incentivizes you to interact with all of them just a bit differently, instead of just catching them and moving on with your day. Beyond that, I just enjoy all the little details this game includes. Like if you fall from a great height near a wild Chansey or Blissey, they'll actually help you and make sure you're okay before running away. A wild Mr. Mime will put invisible barriers around itself so you can't catch it if it notices you. If a wild Murkrow notices you, it will snitch on you to the big boss Honchkrow. A Teddiursa that spawns alone in the wild is usually timid and runs away. But if an Ursaring is nearby, then they become aggressive and fight back. These are only a few of the many, many details that Game Freak crammed into this game, and it's something that I never get tired of seeing. Especially after playing Scarlet and Violet, where the Pokemon disappointingly act much more similar to how they did in Sword and Shield. In Legends Arceus, wild Pokemon feel so detailed and alive, where most games just treat them as emotionless 3D models just roaming the landscape. I will admit, I think one major problem with this game though is that it lacks a lot of random elements to keep it exciting on a replay. While the act of catching the Pokemon in this game is still very fun, a surprising amount of Pokemon in the overworld are static encounters. They always appear in the exact same spots every time you boot up the game. Very few of the Pokemon encounters across the map are truly random. And even though I hadn't played the game in 3 years, a lot of things still felt very familiar. Like, oh, this is that one grove where the Alpha Pachirisu appears, or oh, this is that little spring where Turtwig is found. And obviously, every Pokemon game has areas where only specific Pokemon are found, but the rate at which they appear is much more randomized. Take for instance Scarlet and Violet. God, I can't believe I'm using Scarlet and Violet as a good comparison for once. Where you can go to an area where a Pokemon is supposed to spawn, but it won't always be there. In Legends Arceus, it feels like they are always there, because for the most part, they're coded that way. So if you have a good memory like me, and you remember where most Pokemon in this game spawn, then you probably aren't ever going to have those random wow moments unless you just so happen to find a shiny. But that's not the only area of the game that I think could use a little more randomness. It would be cool if when you sent your Pokemon out to attack an ore deposit that it didn't always drop the same 2 to 3 materials, or when you knock a Pokemon out of a shaking tree, it wasn't always a Burmy, Wormadam, or Heracross. So yes, while my replay of the game was still incredibly fun, with the exception of my team, my playthrough felt exactly the same as the first one. There weren't any major moments that made this particular replay stand out. But, on the other hand, I will say if there is one thing that keeps you interested and engaged while replaying the game, it's the fear of death. Legends Arceus took the bold approach of making it so you can literally die in the overworld. Okay, canonically you just get knocked out and then rescued by a Galaxy team member, but still, most NPCs mention how you risk dying anytime you go out to explore. Surprisingly dark for a Pokemon game, but I'm here for it. But yeah, between fall damage, alpha Pokemon, and freaking Paris and Parasect being the most deadly Pokemon ever, that's where a bit of the uniqueness of the playthrough comes from. Honestly, this is the number one thing I wish they kept moving forward. I know that getting mauled by wild Pokemon seems a bit out of place in Scarlet and Violet's school-based setting, except it isn't. The Paradox Pokemon canonically kill people. I actually enjoy how you have to be careful and there are real consequences for letting your guard down in this game. In Scarlet and Violet, I could literally fall asleep while playing the game and nothing bad would happen to me, except maybe a Paldean and Tauros would run to me and start a battle and I wake up feeling mildly annoyed. I don't know if they plan on death being a feature in future Legends games. Something tells me it wouldn't fit the theme of Legends ZA that well. I mean, what are you gonna do? Jump off a building? You're in a city, not feudal Japan. Now, if this game was set in Baltimore, maybe they can make me feel a bit more scared. Also, for a moment, I'd like to go back to what I said earlier about how the only thing that was really different in this playthrough was my team. Honestly, I find it so hard to find a solid team of 6 that I want to use throughout this entire game, and that's a good thing. Because for maybe the first time ever, every Pokemon feels kinda usable. The way stats are calculated in this game is drastically different from any other Pokemon game, where every Pokemon naturally has way higher stats from the start, and their base stats and leveling up don't seem to matter as much. And honestly, for a non-competitive Pokemon game, one where you can literally only play the single-player campaign, I love this. It makes me feel like Lumineon and Carnivine are as usable as Empoleon and Torterra. And since leveling up doesn't make as drastic of a difference in your stats, this game has very little emphasis on grinding. Like, you could be 10 levels below the next boss and be completely fine. Or you could be 10 levels over and still struggle with it. I think it's a very smart way to design an open world game where you're free to do as much or as little in one zone as you please. My only gripe with it, and this has more to do with the battle system than the way that stats are calculated, but I feel like slow Pokemon just kinda suck under this system. I've tried using Torterra, I've tried using Snorlax, I've tried Hisui and Gudra, and honestly, they all just feel bad. Giving your opponent extra turns to set up, especially when Agile style exists, I just feel like slow Pokemon are awful. That is my one complaint. I wish they had balanced the area a little better. Okay, moving on to the story of the game. Look, we all know it. Most Pokemon games don't tell the best stories. You have Sun and Moon and Black and White, which are like halfway decent by RPG standards, and the rest of them are just there. Sometimes you get games like Red and Blue or Scarlet and Violet where they know the story isn't the focal point of the game, so it takes a backseat to the gameplay for the most part. And then you get games like X and Y, or this one, where characters just show up to give you word vomit for entirely too long. I'll be honest, for a game called Legends Arceus, I was expecting most of the story to be these massive lore dumps that have all these cool references to other historic events in the Pokemon world, but 80% of it is just the same 10 lines of dialogue being repeated to you over and over by the Diamond Clan, Pearl Clan, and Commander Kamado. It feels like the text in this game is stuck in Dialga's time loop because the same bits of exposition just keep coming up again and again and again. And honestly, nothing truly interesting happens until like the very end where the sky turns red and you get banished from the village. From that point to the end, yeah, the story is pretty gas, not gonna lie. I just feel like 70% of the dialogue in the first part of the game could have been cut out entirely. When I go to the Crimson Mirelands, the mission should be as simple as find Ursaluna and then quell Lilligant's rampage. I shouldn't have to go to Salacion Ruins to hear the same lore that we already knew from Diamond and Pearl be repeated. Talk to Calima, talk to Volo, go find Ursaluna, then go back to Jubilife Village and report to Kamado. But oh wait, Arezu is missing, so I gotta go back and use Ursaluna to track her down so I can unlock new haircuts, and then, after all that, then I get to fight Lilligant. There is so much unnecessary fluff. And this game is already slightly longer than your average Pokemon game if you're actually catching everything as you go. I do not care that these characters are just clones of the ones that we already knew from the current day games. That stopped being cool like 30 minutes in. The coolest thing that happens in this story pre-Spear Pillar Crisis is Ingo randomly showing up. And even then, it's left a complete mystery as to how we got there. It has no resolution. Maybe we'll find out in a Unova remake or Legends Kyurem, but it seems like we're pretty far away from either of those right now. Maybe one of the brothers will show up in Legends ZA, but I kinda doubt it. I think the only reference we might get to Ingo is his tattered Pearl Clan outfit being displayed in a museum somewhere, and it will be the saddest thing in Pokemon history. Come back to this video when I'm right. Or probably wrong. Okay, other miscellaneous things. Presentation-wise, this might just be the Scarlet and Violet effect because that game is hideous and runs like a melting stick of butter on the side of a hill. But Legends Arceus actually isn't as bad as I remember it being. For an open world game, it has a fairly consistent frame rate. I think the only time it got noticeably sluggish was during the Noble Avalugg fight. Graphics-wise, it's even a bit better than I remember. It's still far from the best-looking Switch game, or even the best-looking Pokemon game, but it at least has a distinct art style that works for it more often than not. Now, yeah, some parts of the game look rough. There's a ton of muddy textures, and the water effects look really bad, and some of the landscapes aren't too pretty. But I think most of the game looks passable. I really enjoy the old vintage painting art style that they went for, even if the entire package isn't there. Most of the areas are also designed quite well. There's always a few little secrets looming in every area, and they're a bit more diverse than they appear at a glance. The only area I'm not super crazy about is still the Alabaster Icelands. Aside from Snowpoint Temple being this neat little dungeon to break up the open world, it just kind of feels like a very boring and generic snow area. I actually wish they had done this as the 4th area and saved Coronet Highlands as the last area. I mean, the story literally peaks there. I think it's the best designed area. It has that cool section with Ingo and Wayward Cave talking about his past. The game absolutely peaks with Coronet Highlands, and I just wish they had saved it for last. The post-game is also pretty fun. All the legendary quests feel neat. Obviously, the final battle is like my favorite battle in any Pokemon game ever. I already made a whole video dedicated to just gushing about it. I only wish that after you fight Arceus, there was something left to do besides the training grounds battles and shiny hunting. Like a tiny Iron Island area for the post-game would have been nice. That's all I'm saying. Oh, and I've probably mentioned this before, but the music? 10 out of 10. It combines the airy, atmospheric tracks of newer open-world Pokemon areas with the familiar, nostalgic motifs from Sinnoh incredibly well. I don't think there's a single bad track in this game. It might be one of the best Pokemon soundtracks. So, closing thoughts. Is Legends Arceus still one of the greatest Pokemon games of all time? Maybe? I feel like it's no longer an S-tier game in my book. To me, the S-tier games are the ones that are just as good on subsequent playthroughs as they are on the first playthrough. Your Black 2s, your Platinums, your Heart Golds, they all belong in that tier. Legends Arceus, I think, has one of the strongest first game playthroughs, if not the strongest first game playthrough in the series. But on replay, you do start noticing a lot of the repetition and weaker areas of the game. I would still say top of A tier, and most definitely the best Pokemon game on the Switch. That's not a competition at all. But overall, I would say yes. Legends Arceus does hold up, and I think that if you haven't played it yet, you absolutely should. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.